Chapter 246. The curtain of the tent was lifted, and the wind blew in with snowflakes. The dim and small fire suddenly shrank, as if it was about to be extinguished. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, and the desolate mother and son, who were covered by the quilt, exhaled moisture and instantly turned into white mist. However, they did not seem to wake up immediately. The three deacons in black of the judicial department of the divine hall silently looked at the desolate mother and son in the dim light of the fire. Listening to the two long breaths, they slowly stepped forward and stretched out their hands that were hidden in their black sleeves. Suddenly, the quilt was lifted, and a small crossbow appeared in the desolate woman's hand. She aimed at the deacon in black and pulled the trigger. It turned out that she had already woken up and was just waiting for a chance to make a surprise attack. With a swoosh, the sharp crossbow arrow was shot in front of the deacon in black. The deacon in black rolled up his sleeves and suddenly came down like a dark cloud. After the crossbow arrow entered the sleeve cloud, it instantly disappeared without a trace, and no one knew where it had gone. Then, a ray of light shone in the depths of the black cloud on the sleeve of the deacon of the judicial department. A very narrow and thin Taoist sword, under the control of the exquisite psyche power, pierced the weak flame on the bonfire and stabbed the chest of the desolate woman. However, for some unknown reason, the desolate woman's body suddenly tilted, and the narrow Taoist sword did not pierce into her chest, but flew past her shoulder. The leather robe on the woman's shoulder was torn by the tip of the sword, and there was a very shallow wound on the slightly dark skin inside. The injury was not too serious, as if her skin was harder than steel. The three deacons of the judicial department noticed something strange in the tent, and there was a rapid fluctuation of psyche power around them. Two of them looked at the dark corner with gloomy eyes. The deacon in black stretched out his left hand and grabbed the little desolate boy who had just woken up, and dragged him to his feet through the air. He called back the Taoist sword, and silently and without hesitation, stabbed the little boy's throat. The desolate woman was knocked down to the ground. Although the injury was not serious, some strange power attached to the Taoist sword made her body suddenly weak. Seeing that her child was about to be nailed to the ground by the narrow sword, she could not help but let out a painful and sad howl like a dying mother beast. After a swoosh, the narrow and sharp hiltless Taoist sword pierced through the ground that had been softened by the fire and turned into a tiny, round black hole before it disappeared. The little desolate boy did not die. At the moment when the Taoist sword stabbed down, it was as if a pair of invisible hands had grabbed the little boy's shoulders and dragged him away. That black-clothed deacon slowly turned his head. Just like his two companions, he silently looked towards a dark corner of the tent. Previously, they only heard two breaths and did not think that there were other people in the tent. However, at this moment, they were certain that there were other enemies because they heard the drawn-out breathing sound from the corner. Because the two people in the dark corner let them hear their own breathing. Out of the corner of his eyes, Ning Ke noticed that Mo Shanshan's right hand, which was hanging by her side, moved slightly. He knew that she had saved the little desolate boy, so he was more confident about what would happen later. Mo Shanshan looked at the three men who hid their faces in the shadow of black hats. Looking at their dark and heavy coats that hung down to their feet, she naturally thought of the West Hill Divine Palace, which was the most hated and feared institution. She frowned slightly and said, "Are you deacons of the judicial department?" The three black-clothed deacons did not nod or answer. They just looked at her and Ning Ke in silence. Because of the angle of the light, they could not see their eyes, but they could clearly feel the coldness and power contained in their silence. Mo Shanshan frowned even more. She could understand the divine hall's vigilance against the desolate men, but for the time being, she did not understand why the deacons of the judicial department would try to kill the desolate man and his mother without announcing it. She secretly wondered if the desolate man and his mother had a secret identity that would affect the divine hall's affairs. As one of the three calligraphy addicts in the world, she naturally would not be extremely afraid of the black-clothed deacons of the judicial department like ordinary Haotian believers. However, she was a believer of Haotian, and her master was a visiting professor of the Divine Hall. This trip to the wilderness was also under the Divine Hall's edict. Of course, she would not choose to be enemies with these 3 deacons of the judicial department. To avoid any possible misunderstanding, she decided to reveal her identity. However, at this moment, the black-clothed deacon who was the leader asked first, "Are you people from the Central Plains?" This black-clothed deacon's voice was not hoarse and unpleasant like the rubbing of iron and stone, nor did he deliberately reveal a sense of coldness and toughness. He just spoke calmly, but it made people feel a little cold. Mo Shanshan was slightly startled. She glanced at the desolate man and his mother behind Ning Kai and thought that she had guessed the reason for the hostility of these deacons. She gently explained, "Yes, but don't misunderstand." Before she finished her words, the black-clothed deacon who was the leader shook his head and said emotionlessly, "There is no misunderstanding." The second black-clothed deacon said coldly, "You are people from the Central Plains, but you are with the desolate men." The third black-clothed deacon said coldly, "You did not kill the 2 desolate men, so you are either heretics who betrayed Haotian or remnants of the devil's doctrine." The black-clothed deacon calmly concluded, "So there is no misunderstanding. You deserve to die." There was no pause between the 3 black-robed deacons' sentences. They were very natural and smooth, as if they had said it countless times. Or perhaps it was to prove that these deductions were natural to them, so there was no need for them to think. Ning Kai was a little amazed at the skill of these deacons in crosstalk. He wondered why Prince Long Qing, the bigwig of the judicial department, was not so interesting when he met him in Chang'an. He could not help but laugh. He looked at Mo Shanshan and said, "I said that no one would believe me, but you did not." Then he looked at the 3 black-clothed deacons and said, "Anyone who wants to be a deacon in the judicial department must be able to recite the dialogue you just said, right? Speaking of which, it is a little difficult to cooperate so well." He spoke in a serious tone, so it sounded funny. The 3 deacons of the judicial department of the Divine Hall came to the depths of the wilderness to kill some desolate men, including the desolate man and his mother in the tent. Whether it was for the glory of Haotian, for the peace and prosperity of the Central Plains, or for the everlasting foundation of the Divine Hall, these deacons thought that killing was a very serious matter. However, Ning Kai was good at making funny things serious, and he was also good at making serious things funny. Therefore, the 3 black-clothed deacons felt that their belief had been humiliated, and they were very angry. Their faces were covered by black hats, and their burning eyes could not be seen. However, the slightly trembling black clothes and the rapid fluctuation of the chi of heaven and earth in the tent all proved the deacons' anger and the fact that they were about to attack. Mo Shanshan looked at the 3 black-clothed deacons expressionlessly and said, "We can explain." The leading black-clothed deacon said emotionlessly, "Surrender and then explain." As soon as he finished speaking, the deacon in black took a step forward. His thin and pale hands stretched out of his sleeves and covered Ning Kai's head from above. Countless beams of extremely thin pale golden light gushed out of his pale fingertips and instantly formed something similar to a birdcage, locking Ning Kai's body in it. If one tried to push them by force, one's hands would be pierced all over and covered with blood. As he was thinking about these things, Ning Kai in the confinement Taoism was silent and even a little dull. But this did not mean that he had decided to surrender. He just wanted to have more opportunities to observe. However, he did not know that the style of the judicial department of the Divine Hall was very similar to his fighting style. Before making sure that the enemy had no ability to fight back, the deacons of the judicial department would never give up. The deacon in black slightly raised his head, and the firelight reflected his pale and calm face. With a low shout, light suddenly appeared between his thin and white hands, and a dim shadow blasted at Ning Kai's chest and abdomen, who was trapped in the confinement Taoism skill. The acupoints of the snow mountain and ocean of chi of a cultivator were located there, and once hit, it was very likely that the acupoints would be destroyed and the cultivator would die. The dim shadow that the deacon in black sent out was obviously very powerful. Seeing this scene, Mo Shanshan's calm eyes finally flashed with anger. But she did not have time to make a move. Because Ning Ke made the first move. An extremely bright and stunning saber light flashed, illuminating the dark tent. Before this saber light, both the small bonfire that was about to be extinguished and the confinement of golden threads in the black-robed deacon's palm became incomparably dim. The blade of the padao cut straight at the confinement in front of Ning Quebec. When the sharp blade touched the golden threads, it made a sizzling sound, as if it was about to be melted. Seeing that the blade was about to be corroded by the golden threads, the dense talisman patterns on the slender and long blade suddenly lit up. A stream of cold talisman power gushed out from the blade and easily defeated the power of Haotian's divine light contained in the confinement Taoism skill of the deacon in black, and smashed the seemingly magical and powerful golden threads into pieces. Thousands of extremely subtle and crisp cracking sounds rang almost at the same time, as if the strings of thousands of barbarian iron zither had been broken at the same time, or thousands of iron centipedes and kites had their strings broken at the same time. Crack, 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 the thousands of golden threads of the confinement Taoism skill were blown into a mess by the knife wind, drifting everywhere, and no longer had any power. The reason for this situation was not that the confinement Taoism skill of the judicial department of the Divine Hall was unworthy of its reputation, but that the deacon in black was not strong enough to display the real confinement. It was not that Ning Ke suddenly leaped from the no-doubt state to the upper see-through state, but because his padao and the talisman on it were personally made by his two senior brothers in the back mountain. How could an unknown important figure from the judicial department compete with the wisdom and state of the core disciples of the headmaster of academy? Breaking the confinement with a knife was just the beginning. Ning Ke was even more ruthless than the judicial department. Once he started, he would not stop until he saw death. Therefore, the knife light that broke the confinement, cut the golden threads into pieces, and came to the front of the deacon without any hindrance. The knife light illuminated the deacon's pale face. An extremely fine silver needle had pierced into his eyeball at an unknown time, leaving only a little bit of light flickering in the air. The deacon did not have time to cry out in pain, nor did he have time to be shocked by the young man's exquisite control of the chi of heaven and earth. He only had time to realize that the psyche power he had just condensed had dissipated because of the sharp pain in his head. Then he was cut in two by the downward slash of the saber. The two parts of his body did not separate for the time being, only a clear blood line. It was a simple and clean death. The second deacon in black retreated quickly, waving his hands in front of him, sprinkling divine light lines. Ning Ke abandoned his knife and jumped up like an ape, avoiding those dangerous lines, and jumped above the deacon. A piece of cloth fell. Ning Ke stretched out his hands and grabbed the deacon's face with his fingertips. Then he kicked the deacon's sternum with his knees as fast as lightning. With a crisp sound, the deacon's sternum was completely broken. Taking advantage of the forward momentum, the two fell on the snow outside the tent. Ning Ke twisted his hands and broke the deacon's neck. The pale hands of the third deacon in black had quietly come to Ning Ke's back. His palms shone brightly, like a fierce burning flame. Ning Ke did not care. The flame-like divine light in the deacon's palms instantly turned into real flames. Not only his hands. Under the black clothes, the deacon's whole body was burning. He instantly turned into charcoal. After another moment, he turned into flying ash. The deacon's robe lost its support and slowly floated to the ground. Ning Ke looked back at Mo Shanshan and smiled. He walked back into the tent and picked up the padao on the ground. The body of the first deacon in black who died slowly separated at this time. Blood gushed out like a flood and slowly flowed out of the tent, dyeing the white snow on the field red. Unknowingly, the clouds in the sky dispersed again, and the stars shone brightly. Between heaven and earth, it was all white. Mo Shanshan's face was also a little pale. Finally finished a paragraph. I started writing it as soon as I got home. I feel much better. I hope everyone likes it. I feel that this sentence is like what a singer said, if you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 247. The sky cleared up, and the morning light gradually arrived. The beasts that had woken up to hunt for food walked through the cold-resistant forest. They shook off the snow covering the branches, revealing the yellow and black color of the branches. The boundless snowfield gained some color and vitality. However, looking at the thick blood stains that were gradually buried by the snow outside the tent, the girl's face was still pale. Mo Shanshan of Mogan Mountain had never killed anyone. She came to the wilderness and began to kill people, but she never killed her own people. For the people of Haotian Kingdom in the Central Plains, the people of the Divine Hall were naturally their own people. Her teacher was a visiting professor of the Divine Hall. She believed in Haotian and entered the wilderness to investigate the enemy under the order of the Divine Hall. As a result, she killed 3 deacons of the Judicial Department of the Divine Hall in the dark night yesterday. Mo Shanshan was not afraid. She was just a little confused and couldn't accept the fact mentally. She thought about it for half a night, but she still couldn't figure out why the situation developed like this. Why did she naturally burn the deacon of the Judicial Department into ashes with the sky-burning talisman after Ning Ke started to fight back? She didn't even think about it. Ning Ke squatted at the entrance of the tent with a bowl of meat soup in his hand and drank it happily. The mutilated bodies of the deacons in black not far away from the tent obviously didn't affect his appetite at all. His gaze fell on Mo Shanshan's pale cheeks. He noticed that her usually undisciplined and indifferent eyes were a little confused and helpless at this moment. He seemed to understand something and stood up to comfort her. Some things have been done. There is no point in regretting it after it's done, other than burdening yourself with more mental burden. Mo Shanshan shook her head slowly. Her beautiful eyelashes gently flickered. She looked into his eyes and said very seriously, reflection can make us do less wrong in the future. Or do you think we don't need to reflect on it? If it's the inexplicable battle last night, Ning Ke shrugged and drank the last bit of meat soup in the bowl. Then he said, of course I don't need to reflect on it. I don't care who they are in the Judicial Department of the Divine Hall. I only know that they wanted to kill me, so it's natural for me to fight back. Then he added very seriously, the 3 deacons of the Judicial Department were weaker than us. But they came to kill us and died in our hands. It's a matter of intelligence. And if we still get killed by them, then it's a matter of emotional intelligence. The former is called stupidity can be cured, while the latter is called idiocy can't be cured. Hearing such vulgar words, Mo Shanshan couldn't help but frown. She recalled the fight last night and explained to the dead man seriously, the confinement Taoism is similar to the Qi of heaven and earth lock or the encircling formation. Yesterday, the 3 deacons didn't want to kill you immediately. They just wanted to subdue you. But that person immediately wanted to cripple my cultivation. Ning Ke smiled and reminded her, I don't have the habit of being beaten up and then reasoning with you. Like I said before, there's no cure for this kind of mental retardation in EQ. Mo Shanshan said very seriously, since I'm here, of course I won't let you be crippled. This was a very common sentence, but there was a natural confidence in it. The girl killed the deacons of the Judicial Department of the Divine Temple. She was a little absent-minded, but it did not mean that she would think that those deacons were stronger than her. This kind of protective words might make many young men feel a little unhappy. But Ning Ke looked at her bright eyes and felt a little touched. Because of this, he felt inexplicably nervous. In order to get rid of this nervousness as soon as possible, he shook his head and said, even if these deacons of the Judicial Department can't deal with us, what about the desolate mother and son? When they want to kill, will you stop them or not? Ning Ke looked at the girl and said with a smile, you are kind-hearted. Of course you won't watch the orphan and the widow being bullied. Moreover, we have eaten so much dried meat from them. How can we not help them kill some people? Mo Shanshan slightly lowered her eyes and looked at the toes sticking out from the edge of the thick cotton dress. She didn't know what to say to this guy at all. She thought that although he and I are not afraid of people from the Divine Hall, how can you say that killing a few deacons of the judicial department of the Divine Hall is like killing 2 sheep on the road? The girl murmured softly, but they are people from the Divine Hall. When cleaning up the bodies last night, Ning Ke found an ID token from the black clothes of the deacons of the judicial department that he had cut in half. Mo Shanshan confirmed the identity of the deacon in black. It seemed that he was a family member of an important person in the Divine Hall. However, Ning Ke was not afraid, because no one could do anything to him as long as there was no evidence. Although he believed in Haotian like everyone else in the world, he had been homeless since he was a child and had seen many ugly things. Besides, he struggled to survive at the bottom, so he did not have much reverence for the legendary Divine Hall. Later, when he returned to Chang'an City and entered the academy, he was influenced by the pride and narcissism of the mountain for a long time, so his reverence for the Divine Hall was even weaker. He asked, "You are all from the Central Plains, why did you help us kill those people from the Central Plains?" Ning Ke slightly raised his eyebrows and said righteously, "Because we are good people from the Central Plains." The desolate boy scratched his head in confusion, as if he did not understand what good people from the Central Plains meant. Before the southward migration, the senior statesman did not mention such a term when he convened the tribes for a meeting. Suddenly, he thought of something that the senior statesman had said. He suddenly realized something and patted his forehead. He looked at Ning Ke and said, "The senior statesman said that you people from the Central Plains like internal strife the most. Is this called internal strife?" Hearing this, Mo Shanshan could not help feeling a little hot on her cheeks. She did not know how to respond. Ning Ke did not care at all. He laughed and patted the head of the desolate boy. Under Ning Ke's strong request and shameless insistence, he finally succeeded in getting the girl to join in the work of destroying the corpses. It was not because he had a perverted hobby of seeing the girl turn pale and tremble in front of the corpses, but because he increasingly felt that Mo Shanshan was really an inexperienced girl. Although she had such a great reputation in the world, she was still a quiet little flower by the ink lake who could not stand the wind and rain. If he did not let her grow up as soon as possible, he could not count on her to help him much on the way, and she might even drag him down. In his life experience, disposing of the corpses was the second fastest way to help an ignorant girl grow up as soon as possible. As for the best way, he hoped that he would never think of it again in this life. The big black horse angrily carried the heavy luggage and dragged countless things, accompanying the young man and woman to the woodland deep in the snowfield. Behind the tight leather rope, there was a complete corpse on the ground, 2 incomplete but no longer bleeding bodies, and a large bunch of stone grass used to cover the traces. Mo Shanshan walked in front silently. The hem of her cotton skirt had been wet by the snow, but she did not notice it. Because she had not gotten rid of the complicated and confused emotions. The respect for Haotian and the Divine Hall, which had been deeply rooted in her blood since childhood, could not be easily erased by a few words. Although she felt that what Ning Ke had said seemed to be very reasonable, she still felt that something was wrong about this matter. For a girl who had meditated in the ink lake for more than 10 years and did not care about worldly affairs, the difficulty of changing her worldview was second only to changing her view of love. Looking at her back, Ning Ke felt a little helpless and a little tired. Walking on the desolate snowfield, his mind suddenly drifted back to Chang'an, which was relatively far away from the South Pole, to the shop in the alley, and to the little black handmaiden. He silently thought how simple it would be if it was Sang Sang, and Sang Sang would never doubt anything he said. Of course, Sang Sang's worldview, life, love, money, food, and life and death were all his views. A few fat tree rats vigilantly looked at the scene under the tree. There were several human corpses piled up in the naturally formed pit, and the faint smell of blood made them a little uneasy. Ning Ke threw the large bunch of stone grass dyed with snow into the pit, and looked at the black-robed deacon's pale but still serious face as he gently leaned against his right foot. After a moment of silence, he seriously said, "The Divine Hall needs to be respected, and so does the academy. The back of the mountain of the academy has never been involved in the secular world, but since I came to the wilderness this time, it is equivalent to representing the face of the academy. However, it seems that people do not respect me very much along the way. He turned to look at Mo Shanshan and said with a smile, if my second brother was wanted by the judicial department of the Divine Hall, what do you think he would do? He definitely wouldn't be like me, who would just kill a few people. Mo Shanshan slightly frowned and thought of the extremely arrogant Mr. Second of the Academy. She said, then what would he do? Would he kill the Tao addict or Prince Longqing? Of course, second brother would not do that. How could people like the Tao addict or Prince Longqing exist in his eyes? Ning Ke smiled and shook his head. He said, according to my understanding of him, he might directly kill his way to the Peach Mountain and go to the judicial department to find trouble with the great divine priest. His idol is youngest uncle. If it were not for the strict master, I am afraid that he would have gone around to find trouble with others. How could he not take this opportunity to get angry? Mo Shanshan stared at him and was speechless. She wondered what kind of weird people lived on the second floor of the academy. I don't have such strength and confidence. However, glory is my life. If anyone dares to ignore the existence of the academy, I will not hesitate to fight with my little life. Ning Ke looked at the sky in silence. His tone was indescribably melancholy, with a hint of decisiveness. If a teardrop or snowflake could fall on his eyelashes at this time, the scene would be more handsome. Mo Shanshan had accompanied him all the way. Although they couldn't be said to be as close as old friends, she knew that this person was a bit of a rascal. At this moment, when she heard him suddenly say such sonorous and forceful words, she couldn't help but be moved. She seriously stared at his profile and silently thought for a long time. She was still not sure of her own judgment. She asked in a very low voice and not very confident, "Are you lying or joking?" Ning Ke laughed and looked at her. He said, "Since there is no reason to lie to you, of course it is a joke." Mo Shanshan slightly frowned, as if a precious purple fine blade was drawn on a piece of paper. She looked extremely dissatisfied. Ning Ke slightly stopped smiling and looked at her eyes. He seriously said, "But seriously, I have never thought that the Divine Hall is qualified to represent Haotian. Who can prove that Haotian allows them to be the representatives? Maybe we are the ones chosen by Haotian. We need to maintain the light and justice of the world. So if the Divine Hall does such disgusting things in the future, we must refuse to be indifferent and take action when it is necessary." He was still righteous, but this time Mo Shanshan was not fooled by him. She looked at his eyes and seriously thought for a long time again. Then she tried to confirm, this should be a joke. Ning Ke looked at her slightly wrinkled cute little nose and saw the confusion and nervousness in her dull eyes. He could not help but laugh happily. He took out a fu paper from his arms and said, "You can also say that it is a lie." Mo Shanshan looked at his back and suddenly asked, "Why do you like to lie?" Ning Ke did not turn around. He said, "It is a habit I developed when I was young. Sometimes I cannot survive without lying." Mo Shanshan continued to ask, "Then what is your purpose in coming to the wilderness? Why do you teach me those dark things? Why do you teach me how to kill people? Why do you let me get used to it?" The questions asked by simple people were very simple. Because they were simple and direct, they could pierce through countless hidden silk armors. For example, a joke or a lie, and directly hit the heart in the chest. These questions were not easy to answer. Ning Ke stood by the snow pit and thought for a while. He decided to answer honestly. He looked back at her and said calmly, "I want to go to the wilderness to do something important. I want to grab something important. As you said a few days ago, no one will care about my academy background when it comes to the critical moment of snatching food. At that time, not to mention whether I can snatch food from the tiger's mouth, anyone can beat me like a dog. Mo Shanshan looked at him quietly and waited for him to finish his words. Ning Ke flicked the fu paper into the snow pit and continued in a very serious tone, "So I need your help." Mo Shanshan slightly lowered her head and looked at an unknown place in the snow. After a moment of silence, she asked in a low voice, "What do you want to grab?" "One of the 7 tomes of arcane." Ning Ke looked at her slightly blinking long eyelashes and felt the emotional changes in her heart at this time. He said, "You agreed to go to the wilderness with me. I'm wondering if it has anything to do with this matter." Chapter 248. The silly smile seemed especially clean in the pure white snow forest, as if it could infect every snowflake on the branches and every blade of grass under the snow. However, the flame formed from the talisman paper in the snow pit in front of the 2 clearly did not have any infectious power. It did not grow larger even after being blown by the cold wind for a long time. Ning Ke looked at the small flame on the dead body of the Judicial Department's deacon and was a little embarrassed to find that there was such a big gap between his talisman Taoism ability and that of the young talisman master beside him. Last night, Mo Shanshan casually used a talisman to burn the Judicial Department deacon into ashes, but the black clothes were not damaged at all. Compared with this, the fu fire that he painstakingly wrote in Chang'an City was completely weak. How many days would it take to burn the body into ashes? Mo Shanshan noticed the embarrassed expression on his face and almost couldn't hold back her laughter. She forced herself to lower her head to hide her smile. She flicked her fingers that were exposed outside her cotton sleeves, and the fire in the snow pit was suddenly ignited. Those almost blazing white flames appeared and disappeared in a flash. Ning Ke stood beside the pit and didn't have time to feel the scorching temperature. He found that the snow in the pit melted into water and gradually seeped into the ground. The dead body of the Judicial Department deacon had disappeared, and this time the black heavy clothes were all burned. Ning Ke looked at the scene in front of him and sighed. Talisman Taoism was about talent, and the use of talisman was about the use of talisman. His talisman writing was far less than that of the calligraphy addict. At this time, he couldn't even understand how the calligraphy addict did it, so he couldn't help feeling a little resentful. Master Yen Sei said that I'm a rare genius in talisman Taoism in 1,000 years. But after being with you for a long time, I always feel that he is deceiving me, or his vision is much worse than that of the master of calligrapher. He looked at Mo Shanshan's beautiful and clear eyes and confirmed that the girl should be about the same age as him. He was too embarrassed to ask her how old she was, so he shook his head and said with emotion, "You are the real genius in talisman Taoism." Mo Shanshan looked at him and seriously asked, "Senior brother 13, when did you start to learn talisman Taoism?" Ning Ke counted the days and replied, "In spring, almost half a year." Mo Shanshan quietly looked at his eyes. After a long time, she gently sighed and said, "In this case, Master Yen Sei's vision is really right. You are indeed a genius in talisman Taoism." Ning Ke was very happy to hear this, especially when he thought of his daily bragging to Chen Pipi. He smiled and seriously asked, "Am I really strong?" Mo Shanshan nodded, and then she thought of something and curiously asked, "What kind of person he is of your teacher?" Ning Ke thought for a while and answered honestly, "He's a dirty old man who's very lewd and lecherous." Mo Shanshan was slightly startled. She immediately understood something and said softly, "I'm asking the headmaster because I'm curious about what kind of person he is to be able to teach students like you on the 2nd floor of the academy." Taoism young, Taoism Mo and he Taoism Taoist of him. Taoism Taoist, he said. Master of Taoism Taoist Mo of. Mo Shanshan's eyelashes fluttered as if she hadn't expected to hear such an answer. Ning Ke thought for a moment and said seriously, "But according to my understanding of the senior brothers and sisters on the 2nd floor, I think the headmaster must be a very proud, arrogant and great guy. In this world, only the guys in the back of the mountain of the academy dared to call the headmaster of the academy, guy. As for his description, it was all nonsense. People like Mo Shanshan, the calligraphy addict, certainly knew that the headmaster of the academy was very great. How could a person as great as the headmaster of the academy not be proud? What kind of person is your master, the master of calligrapher? Ning Ke looked at her and asked curiously. Upon hearing her teacher's name, Mo Shanshan's expression became somewhat complicated. There was some reverence, some coldness, and some bewilderment. She slowly lowered her head and turned to walk out of the forest, indicating that she did not want to talk about this matter. Ning Ke looked at the back of the cold and desolate figure in the snow-covered winter forest and frowned. He looked back at the snow pit and confirmed that the work of destroying the body was completed perfectly. Then he quickened his pace and chased after the figure. Its hooves stepped on the white snow. The big black horse carried the heavy luggage and walked with its head lowered. It looked at the two clear footprints on the snow in the forest and the silent young man and woman in front of the footprints. It was a little confused. It thought to itself, when you came, you dragged the stone grass. Why did you not care about the footprints when you left? Suddenly, the big black horse understood something and could not help but feel very annoyed. It shook its head angrily and galloped to the edge of the snow forest just like before. Ning Ke used a rope to tie the branches and dry firewood that the big black horse had brought from all over the place. He patted the horse's back with satisfaction and took out the odd-looking grass from his arms and stuffed it into the horse's mouth as a reward. Mo Shanshan looked at this scene curiously. She thought that the people from the second floor of the academy were strange. Even these animals were so strange. It was as if they could understand human nature. She did not know how they were taught. Ning Ke said, to remove the traces on the snowfield, Lord Haotian's snowstorm is of course the best way. If it doesn't snow, then we have to be careful. At least we can't take the same road when we came here and when we came back. Mo Shanshan asked confusedly, I know that was the purpose of the grass. Then why did you burn it and make the big black search for branches everywhere? Ning Ke explained calmly, because I wanted to try the power of the fire talisman I wrote. But I was not sure that it could burn very well. So I wanted to use the grass to help burn it. But it still didn't work. I still need your help. He was really shameless to be able to talk about his embarrassing story so calmly. But the big black horse, who suppressed its hoof and walked slowly behind them and at the same time swept the snow to remove the traces, became even sadder. Mo Shanshan did not care about the rascal in his words. After a moment of silence, she sighed softly and said, I was raised by my teacher in the Ink Lake since I was a child. He never allowed me to touch the real world. If it weren't for the edict of the Divine Hall and I'm really old, I might not have been able to leave the mountain. As Ning Ke listened to the girl's gentle narration, he seemed to see a white-haired grand cultivator looking at a 5 or 6-year-old girl by the pool with a serious face, and sternly ordering her to calm down and write. Mo Shanshan looked at the vast mountains in the distance and said quietly, the so-called 3 addicts in the world are obsessed with talisman Taoism, books, cultivation, and flowers. If they really want to enter the human world, how can they be a match for a clever person like you? Ning Ke shook his head and said, I'm not being humble. No matter how ruthless and realistic my methods are, I can't be a match for you. The state and strength can easily destroy all schemes. Mo Shanshan lowered her head and said softly, I just suddenly understood one thing. I don't understand these worldly affairs. Lu Qinjia is the same kind of person as me and doesn't necessarily understand either. If I was the one sitting in the horse carriage on the meadow that day and the people of Yueluan Kingdom were attacked by the horse gang, perhaps I wouldn't bother to care. Ning Ke looked at the strands of black hair floating around her round cheeks and said, no, you are not the same kind of person as the flower addict. She is obsessed with flowers, so she can treat others like dirt and use them to grow flowers. Although you are obsessed with books, the world in your eyes is still a normal world. You don't use the blood of ordinary people like us as ink. Mo Shanshan felt that this description was very bloody, but it was also very appropriate. She raised her head and looked into his eyes quietly. She said seriously, "Am I really not the flower addict?" "Of course not." Ning Ke said with a smile, "Even if all of you are ignorant, you are kind and ignorant." Ignorance was not a bloody description, but it was also not appropriate. He believed that no one would like it. Mo Shanshan frowned slightly, but her bright eyes were filled with joy. She asked, "Is this a joke?" Ning Ke wanted to say that it was the truth, but looking at the beautiful and young face in front of him, he still nodded. Mo Shanshan turned around and did not say anything else. Her thin and red lips were tightly pressed together and her pink cheeks were slightly puffed up. She was not trying to suppress her anger, but trying to suppress her laughter. "It would be better if, you are not a person who likes to lie. Of course, you are already very good now because you know how I feel, so you lied in the end." Mo Shanshan lowered her head and walked forward quietly. She thought about this sentence in her heart. Her feet stepped on the snow without leaving any traces. It was not intentional, but she felt that she was really floating. After returning to the tent, Ning Ke had a serious conversation with the desolate woman and asked her to do something. Therefore, the woman who participated in the winter ceremony and was not allowed to return to the tribe according to the rules of the desolate man, handed the child to the young man and woman from the Central Plains and returned to the tribe by herself. After 2 days, the desolate woman came back with bad news. Ning Ke did not care, because he knew that it was extremely difficult to make the desolate man tribe believe that he was from the Central Plains. Fortunately, he still obtained some useful news, such as the caravan from Tuyang City and the recent events in the wilderness occupied by the desolate man tribe. After leaving the winter forest and heading north, the temperature became colder, especially when they might enter the northernmost foothills of Tianqi Mountain. Mo Shanshan's date red horse could not withstand the cold, so she left it to the desolate mother and son. After they said goodbye, the two people and the black horse continued their journey. Mo Shanshan asked, "What should we do next?" Ning Ke said, "Enter the mountain." Mo Shanshan was slightly stunned and asked, "Is the tomes of arcane in the mountain?" Ning Ke looked at the distant snow-capped peak and said after a moment of silence, "I am not sure, but I am sure that the Divine Hall people are in the mountain." Due to the height of Tianhan Mountain, there were no plants here. The mountain wind was strong, and all the floating soil and snow were blown away, revealing the deep black rock surface below. On the edge of a protruding cliff between the black rock walls, a young man dressed in a black judicial department robe stood there. He looked at the leaden clouds and snow in the distance, as if he was about to melt into the rock walls. This place could not be reached by Goshawk, so it was not difficult for him. There was not even a trace of pride on that perfect but slightly pale face, because he was Prince Long Qing. Today, when I started writing and was about to get into the mood, I received a call. An old friend of many years suddenly divorced. After telling me about this, my brain started to go blank and then became useless. I have been working on this for 6 or 7 hours, and I am really tired. Tomorrow is Saturday, but I took a leave a few days ago, so I will not rest tomorrow. See you all tomorrow. Have a good weekend. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Influenced by the novels in that world, because of his life experience in this world, and because of the open-minded environment of the academy, it was really difficult for him to instinctively resist and dislike the devil's doctrine. But he was a very realistic person. He understood that his thoughts might not be wrong, but if he really cultivated the devil's doctrine's cultivation method, it would definitely lead to countless troubles. He said with a smile, "I'm the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. Naturally, I can't be like those poor people who have been insulted and hurt but are unable to retaliate. I can't sell my soul to the devil for things like power or power." Mo Shanshan quietly looked at his clean and pleasant face. Thinking of what she had seen and heard along the way, she was more and more sure that he was a guy who did not care about the means to achieve his goals. She could not feel that he had the slightest fear for Haotian at all. And the cultivation method he chose now, whether passively or actively, was particularly focused on his own physical skills. He rarely studied how to communicate with the breath of heaven and earth. If he continued on this path, it would be easy to step into the wrong path. Especially now that he was getting closer and closer to the mountain that was abandoned by Haotian. Mo Shanshan reached out to pick up the snowflakes by the hot spring and gently blew them off. She expressionlessly looked at the black and white mountain range not far away. After a long silence, she said, "Can you promise me one thing?" Ning Ke asked, "What is it?" Mo Shanshan looked back at him and said seriously, "If you encounter the devil's doctrine's cultivation method in this mountain, don't learn it." Hearing this, Ning Ke could not help but be stunned. He looked at the desolate mountain range that stretched between heaven and earth in the distance. He thought that he had heard from the desolate man's tribe that people from the divine hall had entered this mountain and guessed that it had something to do with the tomes of arcane. Why did Mo Shanshan suddenly mention the devil's doctrine's cultivation method? Mo Shanshan's eyelashes fluttered slightly and she softly said, "The front gate of the devil's doctrine is in this mountain range that was abandoned by Haotian. However, the mountain is so vast that not many people know where it is except for the senior sublime being who destroyed the front gate." Ning Ke gradually digested the shock in his heart. He frowned and looked at the mountain range. After a moment of silence, he said, "I really don't know about this. No one told me about it. The information given to me by the desolate man's tribe was very clear. The people from the divine hall snuck into the wilderness to cause trouble to attract the attention of the powerhouses of the desolate man and the senior patriarch society. The real powerhouses of the divine hall had all snuck into this mountain. His senior brothers and sisters in the academy might not be involved in this matter, but if it involved the unknown places, he did not believe that second brother would not have any interest in it. But why did these guys let him come without saying anything? As a guy who participated in the practice for the first time in the history of the second floor of the academy, His Majesty and the elders in the South School might have other ideas. But what was second brother thinking? Ning Ke became more and more lost in thought. His eyes gradually brightened, and then suddenly dimmed as if he was suffering from some kind of horror. His body became very stiff. That was because he remembered a passage that went like this: "Fate itself is a very cruel fellow. If it wants to choose you to undertake a mission, then before it is sure that you are able to undertake this mission, it will do everything it can to break every bone in your body, strip every bit of your flesh, and make you suffer the most extreme pain in the world. Only in this way can your will and temperament be strong enough to qualify to be chosen by fate." This passage was told to him by Chin Pipi. This passage was told to Chin Pipi by second brother. This passage was told to him by the legendary youngest uncle. Everyone in the back of the mountain of the academy knew that second brother was the most brainless follower of youngest uncle and the most fanatical fan. He wanted to be close to youngest uncle no matter in words, deeds or style of doing things. Thinking of the famous words of youngest uncle, second brother threw Ning Ke into the vast wilderness and let him, a weak person in the no-doubt state, face many powerhouses in the divine hall, world wayfarers from the unknown place, and face a miserable life. Then he got the answer. Ning Ke could not help but shiver. He looked at the mountain innocently and helplessly like a drowning child. In his heart, he had already cursed second brother and called him the ancient crown on his head, a wooden club. At this time, the big black horse went somewhere to fill its stomach, and slowly walked back with resentment in its eyes. Ning Ke looked at the big black horse and thought of its insufferably arrogant performance in the royal court horse race. He gradually calmed down the fear and uneasiness in his heart. He frowned and thought for a long time, and suddenly asked, "Is the result more important or the process?" Mo Shanshan was slightly startled and answered, "I think it's the process." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "I used to think it was the result. Later when I comprehended talisman, I thought it was the process that mattered. Now I understand that both are equally important. But without the process, there is no result." Mo Shanshan said, "You are not a person who is used to saying such things." Ning Ke looked at her and suddenly laughed. He said, "Because I have confirmed my purpose of coming to the wilderness." "What is it?" "It has nothing to do with the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane and the front gate of the devil's doctrine. The reason I came to the wilderness in the beginning was to participate in the academy's practice. The purpose of those academy students' practice is to march and fight, and my purpose of practice is naturally to cultivate." Ning Ke said in a very affirmative tone, "The academy let me come to the wilderness, hoping that I can understand something in this process. This is the process, and breaking the state into the see-through state is the purpose of this cultivation journey." Mo Shanshan slowly raised her eyebrows and said incredulously, "You understood it at the beginning of spring, felt it at the end of spring, and then the no-doubt state. Do you want to break the state into the see-through state in less than a year?" Ning Ke said seriously, "I have told you before that I am not far from the see-through state." Mo Shanshan gently shook her head and said, "Wang Jinglu of the Tang dynasty entered the see-through state at the age of 16, but he was enlightened at the age of 4. I entered the see-through state at the age of 14, but I was enlightened at the age of 3. I don't know about the Tao addict, but Prince Long Qing entered the see-through state at a younger age, but I believe he also spent a long time. I have never heard of anyone who entered the see-through state within a year. Even if you are the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy, you have not even seen the headmaster of the academy. This idea is really—" Ning Ke smiled and thought, "That is because you have not stayed in the back of the mountain of the academy. There are too many freaks in cultivation there. However, except for second brother, the rest of the senior brothers and senior sisters seem not to be interested in cultivation. If they put their obsession with chess, zither, flowers and other miscellaneous things into cultivation, they might have already entered the knowing destiny state." Thinking of the great senior brothers and senior sisters in the back of the mountain of the academy, Ning Ke regained his confidence. Looking at the vast snow mountains, he was full of pride and said loudly, "Are world wayfarers so great?" Hearing this, Mo Shanshan's thin red lips slightly opened, but she could not say a word. She thought with a complicated and angry expression, "How could I fall in love with such a stupid person in the summer by the ink lake?" Ning Ke looked at her speechless expression and laughed proudly. He said, "Don't be shocked, don't admire me. I am a person chosen by God who dares to face the bleak life, cruel fate, dripping blood, and countless dangers." Prince Long Qing stood between the black rock walls, tired of the dark clouds in front of him and the flying snow in the distance. He looked back at the deep desolate and deep mountain range. This mountain range was originally the end of the northern foot of Min Mountain, but it was called Tianqi Mountain Range in the language of grassland barbarians and the records of the Divine Hall. After the great divine priest of light betrayed the divine hall and founded the devil's doctrine, he led his followers to build the front gate of the devil's doctrine in this mountain range. From that day on, this mountain range eroded by filth was abandoned by Haotian. A small snowflake was brought from the cliff to his face by the wind, but it could not touch his beautiful face and flew away, which made him gradually frown. After 1,000 years, another great divine priest of light betrayed the divine hall. He did not know what kind of stain it would bring to the glory of Haotian and what kind of damage it would cause to the cause of the divine hall. Although he was the God's favored one who was cultivated by the divine hall and was the perfect Son of God in the eyes of the world, he was still young and inexperienced. Above him were the Tao addict Yi Hongyu, the great divine priest of judgment, and the hierarch lord. He was not qualified to participate in the betrayal of the great divine priest of light and could only think about it. The great divine priest of light destroyed the confinement, left the Yu prison, and betrayed the Peach Mountain, which made the West Hill divine palace fall into great chaos. Almost at the same time, the great divine priest of revelation who returned from the south sent a Haotian edict at the cost of half of his hair turning white. Sensing the desolate man's southward movement, the filthy unknown place in Tianqi Mountain reappeared after decades. The divine hall had never given up looking for the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane lost in the wilderness. After the madman split the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine into ruins with a single sword, it was said that someone from Hautian Taoism had personally searched for it once, but found nothing. Therefore, the Divine Hall had always thought that the tomes of Arcane had been taken to the cold region of the far north by the desolate man. However, at this time, the great divine priest of revelation issued such an edict. Prince Long Qing's frown deepened. It did not affect his handsome face, but it looked a little serious. The front gate of the Devil's Doctrine was the only unknown place that had been destroyed. Once it was reopened, many things would definitely be found. Those things were probably no different from garbage to the madman and the person who went to search for the tomes of Arcane. But for the Tao addict and other young cultivators in the world, they were very precious. He believed in Hautian fervently and yearned for the light. Naturally, he would not be interested in those filthy and dark Devil's Doctrine skills. But after all, he was the priest of the judicial department and knew some historical truths that had been annihilated by time. But it was also because of that failure that he saw the threshold on the other side of the mountain. He had no way to get close to it, let alone cross it. Anger and displeasure would not have an essential impact on the Taoist heart. But the hidden unwillingness and imbalance were definitely the greatest damage to the clarity of the Taoist heart. He was very proud, so he was unwilling. He did not dare to question the headmaster's choice, but he believed that the academy examination was not presided over by the headmaster himself. So there must be other reasons why he lost to Ning Quebec. Because he could not be worse than Ning Quebec. To prove this, he needed to defeat or even destroy that guy in all aspects. The great divine priest of judgment had said so. The hierarch had not said so, but his cold eyes had said so before he left. Yi Hongyu, that crazy woman, had also said so with her scornful smile. So he knew he had to do this. I'll wait for you in this mountain. Prince Long Qing looked at the black and lowly stones at the foot of the snow-capped peak and said with a self-mocking smile, I'm about to become the first person in history to defeat a world wayfarer. Why don't I feel any sense of accomplishment? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. In the carriage leaving Chang'an, he once thought that he was about to enter the knowing destiny state, and that he might even complete it during the journey. However, what happened later made him wake up from this emotion, and then he calmly returned to cultivation. On the long road of cultivation, there was no turning back once one stepped on it. At the beginning, it was extremely fast, but the further one went, the more dangerous it became. The knowing destiny threshold that separated the grand cultivators from the ordinary cultivators was even more towering and extremely difficult to climb. Although he had already seen it, he did not know how long it would take for him to approach and cross it. However, Prince Long Qing did not feel depressed because he was still very young, and he had already seen the threshold. Compared to those people who had cultivated for hundreds of years but still did not know where the treasure mountain was, he had enough right to be proud. Especially at this moment, he knew that he had moved closer to that threshold. When it came to breaking the realm, every step forward was so difficult, so every step forward was so touching and even intoxicating. The snow on dozens of bare branches of the winter tree had all melted, and all the snow flowed to the branches, condensing into crystal clear peach blossoms, reflecting the light from the sky, so beautiful that it did not seem to belong to the human world. Prince Long Qing stretched out his jade-like right hand from his black sleeve and gently pinched an ice peach blossom with 3 fingers. He held it in the air and looked at it against the sun for a long time, and then softly sighed, Long Qing, you are really strong. At this moment, a clear and childish voice suddenly sounded in the distance, full of surprise and curiosity. Are you people from the Central Plains all so thick-skinned? Prince Long Qing stopped smiling and looked in that direction with no expression on his face. On the cliff of the covered snow mountain stood a young girl with a childish face. The girl was tightly wrapped in a lot of ragged fur, wearing a pair of dirty old black boots and a leather hat on her head. Her black and beautiful hair was braided into a long and thick braid, hanging between her knees and swaying constantly. A furry beast tail covered most of her face, but it could not cover the childishness between her eyebrows. Prince Longqing did not sense the fluctuation of psyche power from the girl, and slightly raised his eyebrows, thinking that if she was an ordinary person, how could she appear in the bone-chilling Tianqi mountain, and why did he not notice her? He thought of a possibility, and asked with a slightly cold gaze, the desolate man returning to the south. The girl looked no more than 15 or 16 years old, and her little face was stimulated by the cold wind blowing between the mountains, and her little face was red. It seems like he doesn't want to talk about it. Ning Ke said, I don't know who he is either. I can roughly guess who he is, but I can be sure that he is related to me. Because of this relationship, it will be very easy for me to find the front gate of Devil's Doctrine. Hearing his words, Mo Shanshan's eyes gradually lit up. She could roughly guess who the senior he was talking about was. However, since he didn't say it out loud, she didn't continue. Prince Longqing should also be in the mountain. She reminded him. Ning Ke shook his head and said, if the Divine Hall knew the location of the front gate of Devil's Doctrine, why didn't they come before the desolate men went south? According to my estimation, there shouldn't be anything good left in this valley. The Divine Hall sent Prince Longqing and the others to the wilderness for the same reason as the academy. They just wanted us to cultivate. Mo Shanshan blinked her eyelashes slightly and said quietly, sometimes, cultivation is a matter between two people. Ning Ke didn't misunderstand her words. He understood what she meant. After a moment of silence, he said, if Longqing had to defeat me to complete his Taoist heart, do you think I would give him such a chance? Mo Shanshan shook her head and said, in cultivation, there are many times when you are forced to do so. Ning Ke said very seriously, we are all righteous people. Why do we have to fight and kill each other when we meet? Besides, Tianqi Mountain is so big. How can we meet each other so easily? As soon as he finished speaking, a voice suddenly came from the snow cliff. That person's voice contained very complicated emotions. Some were surprised, some were perplexed, and some were determined. Finally, it all merged into calmness. I also didn't expect to meet you so soon. Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan looked back and saw a person sitting on the snow cliff hundreds of feet away. Because of the different temperatures on both sides of the snow cliff, the right half of that person's body was covered with thick snow, while the left half of his body was black without any snow. It looked like he was sitting on the boundary between two worlds. One side was snowy, the other was spring, and the other was dark and the other was bright. It looked very strange. Along with the voice, the thick layer of snow covering that person's body slowly disintegrated and slid down. That perfect face, because of the wind and frost, appeared somewhat haggard. His usually clean and spotless black Taoist robe was also full of dirt. Especially the black hair that draped over his shoulders, it made him look even more miserable. But his expression was still calm and awe-inspiring, like the Son of God. The world was so big that when you grew up, you would hold great power and be famous all over the world. Chapter 252. Prince Longqing stood up slowly. The snow fell from his black clothes and landed on his boots. He looked at the other side of the snow cliff and said slowly, you can hide behind the calligraphy addict for a lifetime. But the problem is whether she has the ability to protect you, and whether she is willing to do so. After saying this, he stepped over the low fence of firewood in front of him and walked along the snow cliff expressionlessly. The snow cliff was extremely narrow. It looked wider because of the snow. In fact, it could only accommodate a few people walking side by side. It was like a natural stone bridge in the sky, dividing the snowy foothills and the verdant valley into two parts. The side of the snow cliff facing the verdant valley was extremely steep. The gray rock wall was covered with some weeds, making it difficult to climb. There was no path, so it was very difficult to go down. In a short while, Prince Longqing had walked more than 1,000 feet. He looked at Mo Shanshan and said with a gentle expression, "Junior sister Shanshan, have you seen Qin Jia during this trial in the wilderness? She often mentioned you in the West Hill." Mo Shanshan had already woken up from her lost thoughts. She looked at him and bowed slightly. When she was about to say something, Ning Ke flashed out from behind her. He looked at Prince Longqing and said loudly, "Your Highness, you are the priest of the Judicial Department of the Divine Hall. I don't believe that you don't know what happened in the meadow and the palace. Isn't it a little too late to be friendly now?" Prince Longqing's face darkened slightly. He did know about the conflict between the calligraphy addict and his fiancée. But he was a proud person. The reason why he was so gentle to the calligraphy addict was because he respected her. How could it be like what Ning Ke said? Wasn't that almost like a villain? He looked at Ning Ke in the distance and suddenly frowned. He found that Ning Ke had made a lot of progress after a few months. He said, "You are about to enter the see-through state. It seems that the back of the mountain of the academy is really helpful to you." Ning Ke looked at him and said with a smile, "Your Highness is joking again. If it's not helpful, why did the two of us fight to the death that day and let those perverts in the back of the mountain watch?" Hearing the hidden mockery in his words, Prince Longqing did not get angry. He looked at him and said calmly, "We met in Chang'an, in the back of the mountain of the academy, and even in the depths of Tianqi mountain. Sometimes I have to believe in the words of the common people. Perhaps you and I are destined to be enemies for life." Ning Ke said, "I don't want this kind of fate." During the conversation, Prince Longqing's footsteps did not stop. He walked a little further towards the other end of the snow cliff. However, Ning Ke said it like this. And because of his solemn expression and serious tone, his words did not sound like a shrew who beat her husband and scolded her neighbor in a rainy alley. Instead, he sounded quite calm and generous, like a child who picked up a yellowish leaf in the bleak wind and was about to hold a sword and go on a long journey. As for the emotions and choices between life and death, Ning Ke had done too many times in his life, so he was very calm. And because of his calmness, the word "die" that came out of his mouth was more powerful than anyone else's. The stubborn and powerful big black horse had been extremely arrogant in the horse farm all his life. However, when he heard Ning Ke say the word "die" in the meadow of the academy, he was so scared that his limbs went soft and he dared not have any disloyal thoughts from then on. Prince Longqing was a human being, so of course he could understand these words, "I just don't want your Taoist heart to be complete." Defeating me and committing suicide were two different things. More importantly, he could hear the generosity and ruthlessness hidden in Ning Ke's calm words. If he forced himself to fight, Ning Ke would really dare to die in front of him and the world. He had seen many people in the judicial department who were not afraid of death and did not care about the lives of others. There were subordinates, remnants of the devil's doctrine, and those rebels. But he had never seen anyone who was so ruthless or did not care about himself. Mo Shanshan also understood Ning Ke's words. Her cheeks wrapped in a scarf looked slightly pale. Ning Ke looked at Prince Longqing and said, "The academy and the Divine Hall hate each other, but I think they are not interested in fighting. But if I die here today, things will become very troublesome. I have to remind you that the Yen kingdom is too weak, and my second brother has always been unreasonable." Prince Longqing looked at his face and frowned slightly. He said, "You are either hiding behind a woman or hiding behind a mountain school. I am beginning to doubt whether you are a Tang or a man. I have said that this kind of verbal attack has no effect on me." Ning Ke looked at him and answered seriously, "And in this world, except for a few people, who doesn't hide behind a mountain school?" If you are expelled from the Peach Mountain by the Divine Hall today, the remnants of the Devil's Doctrine who have made enemies with you over the years, or those who usually do not dare to provoke you, will all want to bite you. Can you bear it? Prince Longqing looked at him in silence. He suddenly realized that although this guy was young, he could see through the world so clearly, or perhaps gloomily, without the usual hot-bloodedness of young people. Mo Shanshan looked at Ning Kei's back and also fell into silence. The fu paper between her fingers began to tremble even though there was no wind. Ning Kei suddenly said, "I have a horse." The wind and snow on the snow cliff suddenly stopped, and it was quiet. A dark horse. Ning Kei straightened his body and looked at Prince Longqing calmly. He continued, "Your fiancée Princess Qinjia also has a horse. A white horse. No matter if it is a dark horse or a white horse, a stallion or a mare, whoever can ride on the other is a good horse." Hearing this, Prince Longqing's face suddenly darkened. He took another step forward, and the snow on the cliff rose from the ground, as if it began to roll up a snowstorm from the ground to the sky. Mo Shanshan slowly raised her head and looked at Prince Longqing who was gradually approaching. She thought of the last words that Ning Kei had said in the carriage. A cold wind blew on her face, and her face was cold and beautiful. Prince Longqing looked at her expressionlessly and said, "Does Mo Qi really want to fight against the Divine Hall? But I am really curious about the state that the calligraphy addict's half-divine talisman has reached. Did I say that I want to fight with you? Did I say that she wants to fight with you?" Ning Kei suddenly raised his right arm and pointed at his face. He said, "In the palace, my dark horse defeated your white horse. I also want to see if I can defeat you. So I accept your first bet." Mo Shanshan looked at his profile in confusion. She thought, "You didn't agree before, why did you agree now?" Prince Longqing didn't want to agree, but he saw a brocade bag hanging on his wrist when Ning Kei pointed at it. The brocade bag was silver blue and embroidered with simple flowers. It looked very ordinary as it swayed gently in the wind and snow. But Prince Longqing knew that the brocade bag was not ordinary. He felt the strong aura coming from it, so he decided to wait and see what Ning Kei wanted to say. A complete divine talisman was qualified to make anyone wait for a moment, no matter when, where or what situation it was. He said expressionlessly, "Say it." Ning Kei said, "Let's make a bet on the date of breaking the realm. The first one to break the realm will be the winner, and the loser will destroy his snow mountain and ocean of qi. If I win, I will leave the academy, and you will leave the Divine Hall." It was a very ordinary tone, but the content of the bet was very unusual. If the cultivator's snow mountain and ocean of qi were destroyed, he would be a useless person. Especially the supplementary conditions, it was like pulling out his tendons and peeling off his bones. It was extremely cruel. He was gambling with the two most precious things of a cultivator. Ning Kei looked at him and said, "This bet is to your advantage, because you need to get rid of me, the obstacle in your heart. But you have never been an obstacle to my cultivation. But you don't need to thank me." The strong and proud aura was like a bright lamp between heaven and earth, guiding him through the green forest, through a swamp, and then through a muddy, rugged, wet and misty mountain road, and finally came to a lake. The lake was not large, with a radius of less than 1,000 feet. The lake bank was winding, and the water rippled gently. It was unknown how long this strange valley had existed, and there was no trace of artificial carving. The verdant valley was warmer than the snow-capped peak of Tianqi Mountain outside, but in fact, it was still a little cold. It was more like the winter in Chang'an City. The surface of the lake bank was covered with extremely thin ice, which automatically dispersed when the water rippled, and gradually condensed on the quieter surface in the distance. There seemed to be no artificial traces, and it was a natural lake in the valley. But Ning Kei did not think so, because the strong and familiar aura came from the depths of the lake. He stood by the lake and stared at the lake for a long time. Through the clear water, he saw the white sand and round stones at the bottom, but he did not see anything unusual. Mo Shanshan couldn't sense the strong aura, but she could clearly sense the existence of other things. She walked to Ning Kei's side and looked at the fish swimming slowly in the lake. She said softly, "This lake is a big tactical array. It's strange that the lake itself is the eye of the array, which seems to violate the principles of tactical arrays." After a moment of silence, Ning Kei said, "The tactical array of the unknown place is naturally a little different from ordinary tactical arrays." "You mean this lake is the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine?" She looked at the reflection of the snow-capped peak in the distance, and suddenly remembered some records in the scriptures. She said in a trembling voice, "It was recorded in the scriptures that there is a lake in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. Is it this lake?" Ning Kei said, "It should be right." Mo Shanshan looked at the ordinary lake in front of her, and could not believe that she found the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine so easily. She said, "I really did not expect that I would have the opportunity to see the remains of the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine in my life. If it were other cultivators, they would be very excited to see the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine that had been destroyed in time, and to see the legendary unknown place. They would even jump into the lake in excitement. If it were any other time, Ning Kei might also be so excited, but now he was very calm, because whether the Heming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane was hidden at the bottom of the lake or the relics of the predecessor in the sect, it had nothing to do with him for the time being. He suddenly asked, "Does this lake have a name? Is it mentioned in the West Hill scriptures?" Mo Shanshan asked, "Why do you care about this?" Ning Kei looked at her and said with a smile, "In the future, the history books will record that Ning Kei, the 13th disciple of the second floor of the academy, broke through the see-through realm by this lake. How can this lake not have a name? Neither the nameless lake nor the unnamed lake sounds good." Mo Shanshan sighed, thinking that breaking through the realm was so difficult and mysterious. How could it be broken through so easily? His words were a little too arrogant, so she said helplessly, "The Devil's Doctrine calls themselves the Enlightenment sect, so they call this lake Daming Lake." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. It would make sense if the world wayfarers of the Academy in the past were as strong and powerful as Second Brother. However, the arrogant man who carried the gavel and those mysterious senior brothers and sisters in the back of the mountain did not look like otherworldly sublime beings at all. Mo Shanshan looked at him and asked, "Do you still have confidence after knowing these things?" Ning Kei woke up and said happily, "I am the world wayfarer of the Academy. I am much stronger than Prince Long Qin, the divine son of West Hill, in terms of background, temperament, and style. Why don't I have the confidence to trample him to death?" Mo Shanshan did not expect that his confidence came from this. She could not help but fall silent. After a moment, she said softly, "When breaking the realm, you need not only desire and confidence, but also opportunity. When I was 14, I received a volume of scripture written by my teacher and understood the mystery of heaven and earth after reading it for half a night. I hope you can find your opportunity as soon as possible." Ning Kei thought of what Master Huang Yang had taught him in the Wanyan Tower and nodded. However, opportunity was something that could only be found by chance. Just like the rain in summer, if it had fallen earlier or later, he might not have known it. Just like the lake water overflowing the willow embankment, the lake water must be full. However, if it wanted to overflow the long embankment without spreading into a flood, it needed other reasons. Ning Kei was neither a typical Tang nor a typical cultivator. He was not good at sitting and discussing Tao or understanding Tao. His cultivation, like his survival, was always full of perseverance and ruthlessness. It was the same since he was a child when he meditated hard. It was the same after he entered the academy and entered the old library. Later, he understood that life was like a problem and all kinds of infatuation. He was still used to solving problems to cultivate, but it was no longer that hard. Looking at the looming threshold of see-through at the bottom of the clear lake, he started his cultivation again. If he did not know how to break it, then he would see through it. He looked at the lake, the twilight haze, and the reflected stars in the night sky. He broke a willow branch and found a fish hook from his luggage. He hung a few pieces of dried meat given by the desolate women on it and hung it into the calm lake. It disturbed the stars and woke up the fish swimming under the lake rocks. Then he started fishing. The willow branch by the Daming Lake was extremely tough and suitable for fishing, perhaps because it had been tempered for thousands of years by the aura of heaven and earth drawn by the front gate tactical array of the Devil's Doctrine. The willow branch by the Daming Lake rose and fell. After a while, some fish swallowed the bait and were hooked. Chapter 255. Mo Shanshan had been looking at the lake. She was the best talisman master of the young generation. Before Ning Ke appeared, she had been the successor of the divine talisman master. As Master Yen Sei said, the tactical array was the big talisman. The best talisman master was undoubtedly the best tactical array master. She looked at the lake and wanted to see through the magic tactical array of the Daming Lake. She stood by the lake and looked at it carefully for a whole night. Finally, she roughly guessed the origin of this verdant valley. There was a big tactical array in the depths of the clear lake. Its specific function was unknown, but it was enough to block the sight and even the perception of psyche power. There should be a more powerful tactical array above the valley, which was enough to block the influence of nature. According to her analysis, it was extremely cold this year. The cold wave between heaven and earth came from the north. The outer tactical array shrouding the valley was broken from time to time. The plants in the valley, which were locked by the big tactical array, regained their vitality. Greenery spread out, and then there was a verdant scene in front of them. This could also confirm what Prince Long Qing said on the snow cliff. However, since the big tactical array in the valley was broken, greenery reappeared, and the cold air from the natural world poured in. The spring in the valley had not yet fully flourished, and it would fade because of the chill. That was why the thin ice on the lake was formed. Mo Shanshan sat quietly by the lakeside. Her hands, which rested on her knees, moved slowly and silently as she calculated. No matter how she calculated, she could not figure out under what circumstances the formation in the depths of the lake would be activated. Could it be that the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine will only be reopened when the lake is completely frozen, or when a certain pivot is triggered and the lake is emptied, causing the pivot to lose its effectiveness? She frowned slightly and looked at the calm surface of the lake that was illuminated by the starry night. She couldn't make up her mind. The more she studied this formation, the more she could feel the wisdom and great power contained in it. She couldn't help but feel a strong sense of reverence for the Devil's Doctrine and the seniors who had set up this formation. As the morning light came, Mo Shanshan slowly opened her eyes and woke up from the empty state of mind. She turned around and saw Ning Ke still sitting on the stone by the lake, fishing. It was funny that his eyes were closed. Obviously, he had followed her. His head nodded up and down with the lake, as if he was fishing with his head. Perhaps feeling her gaze, Ning Ke woke up. He rubbed his eyes and his belly. Looking at the girl who was looking at him, he asked, "Hungry?" Mo Shanshan nodded gently. It was a great enjoyment to drink a bowl of warm fish soup after such a long time in the ice and snow. Ning Ke smiled and praised it. Then he said, "It's a pity that I didn't bring any seasoning. Otherwise it would be better." It was a casual sentence, mainly a compliment. But it was the first time in her life that the calligraphy addict cooked alone, and there were some other meanings in it. So she was not very happy after hearing it. She held the bowl of fish soup with her head down and gently blew the foam and steam on it. Her long eyelashes slightly blinked. After a while, she asked softly, "Is it worse than what you usually eat?" "It's in the wilderness. How can I make delicious food?" Ning Ke drank up the soup in the bowl and began to eat the fish. He said vaguely, "The one in my family has never made any good food in her life. It always tastes the same. I'm tired of it." Mo Shanshan keenly noticed that he said, "the one in my family," instead of, "the little handmaiden in my family." So she became more silent. After a while, she raised her head firmly and looked at him seriously. She said, "I'll make it better and better." After drinking the fish soup and eating the dry food, Ning Ke continued to sit on the rock by the lake and fish. The willow branch in his hand had already turned white from being soaked in the lake water. There was no hook or bait on the branch. Other than some naughty fish that would occasionally touch it, no other fish showed any interest in it. Mo Shanshan spread out the book and began to write not far from him. The light from the winter sun in the sky was warm and beautiful when it was reflected into the green valley by the snow-capped peaks around the Daming Lake. When Ning Ke was bored fishing, he would occasionally leave the big stone by the lake and come to the girl's side to watch her write. After a few comments, he would pick up the brush and write a few words himself. They could compare and appreciate each other. Both of them were calligraphers, so they could endure loneliness the most. In this uninhabited green valley, the two of them wrote, appreciated the words, and looked at the lake. Time flew slowly, and there was nothing special. Of course, most of the time, Ning Ke still sat by the lake and fished. The big array outside the green valley that went against nature had completely disappeared. The cold air of the world and the warm spring in the valley met and resisted each other. It happened to be the time when spring was at its strongest. The broad-leaved forest by the lake magically grew countless green leaves in a very short period of time, swaying in the wind pleasantly. Ning Ke held the willow branch in his hand and fell asleep unknowingly. Suddenly, he woke up with a start. He looked up and found that there was no beautiful and peaceful Daming Lake in front of him. There was no trace of Mo Shanshan beside him, only desolation. The green in the valley spread up the cliff like mountain vines, and grass gradually grew among the snow under his feet, like stars. If you want to get rid of the fence, why bother to be trapped in the fence? After a day's rest, the cold became very serious. I feel dizzy, uncomfortable, and sore. Fortunately, there is nothing wrong with my brain. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. If he had crossed the threshold of knowing destiny in the Peach Mountain of West Hill, the great divine priest of judgment would have personally protected him. However, at this time, he was deep in the snow mountain of the wilderness. He had to overcome all the dangers and obstacles by himself. At this moment, the sound of clothes fluttering in the wind rang out. The Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, appeared on the snow cliff in red. Her black Taoist bun was slightly messy and her beautiful face looked a little tired. She must have consumed a lot of energy in the chase with Tang Xiaotang. She glanced at Prince Longqing, and her clear and cold eyes revealed a trace of scorching and admiration. But she did not do anything. Without a word, she sat down not far from him and looked around coldly. Prince Longqing nodded to her to express his gratitude. Then he sat beside the firewood that had sprouts and slowly closed his eyes to wait for the moment when the flowers bloomed. He calmly and joyfully welcomed the arrival of the knowing destiny state. Deep in the verdant valley, beside the Daming Lake, Ning Ke slightly bowed his head on the stone. He seemed to have fallen asleep. The willow branch in his hand trembled from time to time in the lake as his body moved up and down. A fish swam from the depths of the lake. The movement of its tail was a little strange, mainly because its rhythm was not as light as that of its companion. It seemed to be a little tired. With the light shining into the lake, it saw the trembling willow branch. Then it swam over and carefully held it with its lips. The fish knew that it was a willow branch, and it was a willow branch that had become white and fat after being soaked in the lake. There was no meat or worms on it, but it wanted to swim over and hold it. Because the fish always felt that it should be there, and it was born to be there. Because the willow branch was so close to its confidant, as if it was a part of its body. Ning Ke opened the big black umbrella in his dream. Then he woke up and found that he was still holding the willow branch tightly in his hand. He rubbed his eyes with his left hand and found that the willow branch, which had not been touched for a long time, moved again. He could still vaguely feel the drooping feeling between his fingers. He picked up the willow branch and found that there was a fish hanging on it. The fish kept swinging its tail, splashing water everywhere. However, the strange thing was that no matter how much it struggled, the fish's lips were tightly biting on the willow branch, unwilling to let go. Ning Ke thought that the fish was really stupid. The vast North Min Mountain was the Tianqi Mountain. It covered thousands of miles and was as vast as the starry sky at night. The Verdant Valley was just an inconspicuous place in the Tianqi Mountains. There were more protruding snow-capped peaks and cliffs. Two extremely straight and steep cliffs had been facing each other in silence for thousands of years. In the middle was a terrifyingly deep and bottomless gorge. Two people were sitting on the two cliffs in silence, just like the cliffs themselves, facing each other in silence. A Taoist priest sat on the east cliff. He had calm eyes and a thin body. He wore a pale white collarless robe and carried a thin wooden sword without a sheath on his back. His black hair was still combed into a bun, with an ordinary ebony fork inserted in it. It was not as unshakable as a pine tree, but more like a cloud attached to the beautiful sky. On the west side of the cliff sat a man. His eyes were calm and his body was strong. He was wrapped in a winter coat made of animal skin and cotton. His hands were empty and he had no weapons. The slightly bulging muscles under his clothes seemed to contain infinite power. His bare legs were casually covered with boots that no one knew where he picked up. It was as if he could break the sky with just one step. The child-looking Tang Xiaotang stood behind the man and held the blood-red giant knife tightly. She looked warily at the Taoist priest sitting on the opposite cliff. She felt a little cold. She knew who the Taoist priest was. She also knew that the deep gorge between the two cliffs seemed insurmountable. However, whether it was her brother or the Taoist priest on the opposite cliff, they could meet at any time if they wanted to. Because they were the world wayfarers of Jishou Abbey and Devil's Doctrine. A cold wind blew in the gorge. The Taoist priest on the east cliff spoke slowly with his clothes fluttering. He was dozens of feet away, but his voice was so clear that it seemed to be ringing in everyone's ears. I haven't seen you for 14 years. You are still like a stone, Tang. Tang said, the proud Yi Su seems not so proud anymore. Yi Su said calmly, you have been guarding me for 3 days and 3 nights. Are you going to guard me forever? Tang said, this is our place. Yi Su shook his head and said, but the tomes of arcane are our tomes of arcane. Tang shook his head and said coldly, this tome of arcane is our tome of arcane. Yi Su said, the Devil's Doctrine has already withered. The other branches have all disappeared. Your teacher has not appeared in the world for a long time. I'm afraid he has already disappeared. Only you and your sister are left. How can you resist the torrent of fate? Tang said, there are pillars in the middle. Yi Su looked at him quietly and suddenly said, you don't fight because you have your reasons. Tang looked at him coldly and said, you have your reasons for not fighting. After a moment of silence, Yi Su said, I've waited for 14 years for an opportunity to ask him for guidance. If I fight with you before this, it'll be too disrespectful to myself and him. Tang said coldly, you can't be reasoned with. You are not qualified to fight him. Yi Su smiled and said, I have to give it a try. Are you interested? Tang shook his head and said directly, I am no match for him. Moreover, My reasons are not because of him. Yi Su raised his eyebrows and asked, You have seen him? Tang nodded. Yi Su said, Since both of you have your reasons for not fighting, are you really going to continue watching on this cliff? Tang looked into the distance and somewhere in the vast mountains. He said, Who do you think will break the realm first? Yi Su followed his gaze and said calmly, I believe in the Prince of Haotian Taoism. Tang said, I believe in Ning Ke because he is a disciple of the headmaster of the academy. Yi Su said no more. Tang did not say anything either. The two of them were silent on their respective cliffs. The bet had been made. Ning Ke did not know whether he would break the realm or not. It was no longer just a bet between him and Prince Longqing, but a more important external factor that would indirectly affect the two powerful world wayfarers. His demeanor and behavior did not show any signs of anxiety or nervousness, as if he was not affected by the promise to break through the realm. He took the stupid fish from the lakeside and waved his hand to signal Shanshan to move aside. He took out all the seasonings and animal oil he could find from his luggage and prepared to cut the fish raw. The fish in Daming Lake were delicate, fat, and scaleless, especially their bellies, which seemed to be transparent. When he put it in the frying pan, there was a sizzling sound and a strange fragrance. Holding a branch, Ning Ke stood by the fire and looked at the color of the fish skin in the pot attentively. He frowned and looked more serious than when he was cultivating the enlightenment state. He only flipped the fish skin after a long time. Instead of using firewood, he used the talisman fire in an extremely extravagant manner, controlling the temperature extremely precisely. While carefully frying the fish, he explained to Mo Shanshan, when it comes to frying fish, the heat is the most important, and you can't flip it casually. This thing is just like governing a country and cultivation. Strategically, we can look down on it and tell ourselves that frying fish is nothing, but tactically, we must pay attention to it and be careful. The calligraphy addict was begged by him to give up 2 fire talismans. Thinking of cooking with talisman Taoism, she felt a little sad and distressed. But after listening to his explanation, she felt that it was indeed the case. The translucent belly of the fish gradually swelled in the warm oil, and gradually revealed the shining hook inside. Ning Ke was stunned. It took him a long time to figure out that this fish was the first one that took the bait when he was fishing by the lake and then took away all the meat on the hook. You were obviously unwilling at that time. Why did you come back without a hook now? Looking at the yellowish and fragrant fish in the pot, he slowly raised his eyebrows and showed a smile on his face. He handed the branch in his hand to Mo Shanshan, turned around and walked to the lakeside. Looking at the snow-capped peak reflected in the lake, the psyche power in his sense of perception moved out of his body according to his mind. However, he did not perceive the surrounding chi of heaven and earth, because the psyche power had integrated with the chi of heaven and earth by the Daming Lake. He slowly closed his eyes, and his mind followed the psyche power that integrated with heaven and earth. He saw the blue stone by the lakeside, the fish in the lake, the gravel under the fallen leaves, and everything else. It was not an ordinary look, not a look through the light, and not a perception of the surroundings by controlling the chi of heaven and earth with the psyche power. It was the most subtle perception of heaven and earth. Then Ning Ke opened his eyes and looked up at the sky. He saw the white clouds floating in the blue sky, which were in various shapes. Some were like horse gang, some were like horses, some were like Shubi Lake, some were like trees in Min Mountain, some were like the cornice of Spring Breeze Pavilion, and some were like the old library. He stretched out his trembling fingers and gently drew in the wind by the lakeside. He murmured, "This world is full of talismans." Mo Shanshan held the branch in her hand and looked at the fish being fried in the pot. Her pretty little face was filled with nervousness. She didn't know when she would be able to move. As the smell of burning gradually spread, the translucent belly of the fish in the pot suddenly exploded. The fish hook flew out with a ding and fell into the lake water, disappearing instantly. Listening to Ning Kei's silly words, she looked at the messy fish in the pot and whispered shamefully, "The fish broke." Ning Kei turned around and looked at her seriously, "I broke it too. After designing for a long time, I finally found my own favorite design for breaking the realm. I like this chapter. The life of a foodie is always happier than that of a bitter cultivator." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 257. Thousands of streams converged into a river, crossing thousands of miles of valleys, hills, plains and mudflats, and finally gushed out to the sea. It was so pleasant, just like Ning Kei's mood at the moment. He used to be a naughty boy in Chang'an City, but he suddenly encountered an accident. He was used to the ugliest things in the world and experienced the most dangerous things in the world. In his young age, he had to wander around with Sang Sang, and finally became a woodcutter boy in a border town. When he knew there was Tao in the world, he didn't know where it was. He went to the market in Kaiping to find a record of the response of the Tao, but he couldn't find anything after reading it for several years. When he met a sage by chance, he realized that all his acupoints were blocked, and the so-called cultivation was just an infatuation and delusion. Fortunately, in the end, he was enlightened and entered the academy. All his complaints were gone. Today, he finally passed the important juncture of cultivation and entered the see-through state. He only felt extremely comfortable both physically and mentally. Standing by the lake with his hands on his waist, he leaned back and looked up at the clouds floating in the blue sky. He only wanted to shout or giggle a few times to express all the pleasure in his chest and abdomen. Mo Shanshan looked at him by the lake and found that his figure was so harmonious with the lake and mountains. Feeling the aura coming from the wind, she understood what he had done and showed a sincere smile. Ning Kei looked at the clouds in the sky, the clouds on the lake, and the real or imaginary snow-capped peaks in the clouds. He was moved to understand the subtle feelings brought by the see-through state. At this time, he didn't have a clear understanding of the real meaning of entering the see-through state, but at least he clearly felt that his understanding of talisman Taoism had deepened a lot. On a clear day, in a winter lake, in a verdant valley, all the traces between heaven and earth turned out to be the lines of talisman. Because of this new understanding, he had a strong desire to set up a desk by the lake, grind the ink and write down all the traces between heaven and earth in his sense of perception. But he didn't do so, because there were more important things waiting for him to deal with. On the south bank of the Daming Lake, there was a gentle slope near the cliff of the verdant valley. With the dissipation of the tactical formation and the return of spring, the gentle slope had long been occupied by green weeds and turned into a meadow. However, the outermost part of the meadow facing the cliff was invaded by the chill outside the valley, so it looked a little withered. Ning Kei and Mo Shanshan stood in the frost grass and looked up at the snow cliff in the distance. Today the sky was blue and clean, and the view was excellent. The hard iron bow was slightly deformed and the bowstring was deeply inserted between his fingers. It is so good that the world is flat. After saying this, he loosened his fingers. The tight bowstring rubbed against his fingertips and rebounded at a high speed, driving the talisman arrow to shoot out. The sharp arrowhead instantly protruded forward from the archer's grip. When it traveled a certain distance, the diamond embedded in the archer's grip slightly rubbed against the metal arrow shaft. The diamond tip, which had an extremely complicated profile, casually drew a line on the arrow shaft like a brush tip dipped in ink on a piece of paper. It was the blank talisman on the arrow shaft. It was the last stroke of the talisman. The tail of the arrow finally left the bowstring. It was unknown whether it was because of the high speed or the activation of the talisman on the arrow, but when the tail of the arrow left the bowstring, it brought a milky white turbulence. Then the primordial 13 arrows disappeared in the milky white turbulence. Note, Prince Long Qing, who was sitting cross-legged on the snow cliff, felt the fluctuation of the aura of heaven and earth from afar. He even clearly sensed Ning Kei's hostility and killing intent. However, he did not care and even opened his eyes contemptuously. In his sense of perception, half of the darkness had been defeated. It was as if the stars were about to occupy the entire sky. On the firewood behind him, the peach blossom had already bloomed, and the last petal was about to burst out with a final tremble. The higher one's cultivation, the harder it was to break the realm, and the more dangerous it was. However, he did not believe that Ning Kei had any means to interfere with him since they were so far apart. If it was not the sword of Liu Bai, the sage of sword, who could hurt someone from more than 10 miles away, then it could only be the legendary sage who had entered the limitless state. But did such a person really exist in the world? Moreover, he had the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, to protect him. This was Prince Long Qing's real thought when he was about to enter the knowing destiny state for the first time in his life. Then he immediately knew that he was wrong. Ning Kei, who had just broken the realm, was at the most perfect peak of his life. He did not adjust, did not wait, and did not even allow himself to be overflowing with joy. He shot his most powerful primordial 13 arrows. The power of meditation accumulated over the past 10 years, the tenacity left in his heart from all the hardships and struggles, all the knowledge of heaven and earth, as well as the hatred, unwillingness, resentment, indignation, and callousness, were all released in this arrow. It had nothing to do with revenge, but it was indeed very happy. The water of Daming Lake was rolling and shaking, and the fish were panicking. In his youth, he had to travel to various countries to make judgments, and finally, he was blessed by Haotian and became the brilliant son of God in the Peach Mountain. Today, he was finally about to pass the important juncture of cultivation and enter the knowing destiny state. He only felt that his body and mind were incomparably comfortable. With his back against the green, he faced the snow peak, and the old wood beside him bore new peaches. It seemed that his life was about to be complete. However, at this moment, an arrow flew from the sky. An arrow destroyed everything he had. How could he not feel pain? Note, the 207 words here were directly used from the first volume of the Primordial 13 Arrows. No matter how I thought about it, I could not think of a better description of shooting arrows. Therefore, I used it directly. Even if I cut out the number of words in this chapter is still sufficient. I would like to report to everyone that I have put in a lot of effort into this chapter. Please read carefully. Today is the World Sleep Day, but patient I have actually been unable to sleep until now because of coughing and random thoughts. I do not know how to praise myself, but fortunately I was awake when I was writing. There is no reason to need votes for the recent updates, but I like the quality of these 2 chapters very much, so there is no reason to not need votes. So if you are willing to vote for my recommendation in monthly votes, please vote for Jiang Yi. Thank you very much. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for my recommendation in monthly votes. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 258. Yi Hongyu floated to Prince Long Qing's side. She frowned and her expression was solemn. She reached out her jade-white palm and placed it on his head. A faint and pure aura of Taoism surged from her palm and enveloped his body. The faint and pure aura gradually became thicker and shone with a golden light, just like Haotian's divine light. Then, she flicked her left sleeve and stuffed a pill into his mouth. She then crushed it with her palm and pushed it into his abdomen. With her simple and quick actions, the blood flowing out from the arrow wound on Prince Long Qing's chest and abdomen magically stopped. One could even vaguely feel a strong aura of life constantly repairing something. This pill was a top-grade medicine that the Tao addict had brought out from the temple when she was young. The Taoism aura with a strong aura of life was a secret skill of Peach Mountain. With this method, she had pulled Prince Long Qing back from the brink of death. Prince Longqing's face was extremely pale, but he would not die on the spot. However, no matter what Yi Hongyu was doing, he did not respond. He just silently lowered his head and looked at his chest. A drop of sweat fell from Yi Hongyu's temple and was instantly blown away by the snow wind under the dark clouds. In order to save Prince Longqing, she had suffered a great loss in a short period of time. She simply said, "It was too fast." If it were any other time, the proud Tao addict would never explain anything, even if the other person was the divine priest of judgment. However, she had appeared on this snow cliff today to protect Longqing, but she had failed to stop the arrow, causing Longqing to be seriously injured and on the verge of death. Therefore, she felt that it was necessary to explain. That arrow was too fast, so fast that she could not even react. Prince Longqing did not answer her. She did not know whether it was because of his heavy injury or some other reason. He looked at his chest in confusion. He knew that the injury on his body could probably be healed in a few months. However, the ocean of qi that was destroyed by the arrow, especially the Taoist heart that was damaged when he broke the realm, could never be repaired. In his sea of consciousness, the stars that filled the sky had shattered into billions of messy mirrors, and the dark night that had been twisted into cotton drifted everywhere in the space, gradually occupying all corners in his line of sight. He looked at the hole in his chest like a fool. It was as if he could see this chaotic world. In that instant, he recalled many things, as well as everything he had experienced in those times. The colorful chapters, the dazzling images, the cold and unmoving face illuminated by the firewood, the half-burnt body crying out in pain on the fire execution platform, the rotting corpses in the U-prison, and the proud and calm self that watched all these, all turned into countless pieces of snow and quickly flashed past the black Taoist robe in front of him. Many people died in his hands, including strong and violent men, chaste and fair virgins, charming and voluptuous women, frail and old men, and adorable children. Because of his devotion to Taoism and devotion to Haotian, he did not hesitate or waver. He happily destroyed the lives of all living beings. However, only at this moment did he realize that the feelings he felt when he destroyed another person's life were all fake. Only the pain of his own life being destroyed was real. Therefore, he saw his gloomy and hopeless future. Yi Hongyu looked at the gloomy luster on his face. She knew that his pride and his strong cultivation willpower were all destroyed by that arrow. She could not help but scold him in a low voice, "Do you want to destroy yourself?" Hearing these words, Prince Longqing suddenly laughed. His hoarse laughter was very weak. In the gradually increasing wind and snow, he seemed to be extremely painful and confused. Then he murmured softly, "I'm already useless." There was no possibility of entering the knowing destiny state. For a divine son of West Hill who was willing to dedicate his life to Haotian, living was just like a dog. He painfully turned his head with difficulty and looked at the wind and snow outside the cliff and the darkening sky in the depths of the wilderness. He said in confusion, "I was a prince. I was going to be the Yen Emperor. My feet stood on both sides of Taoism and the human world. I should have been unparalleled in the world. However, I have been destroyed. I have been abandoned by Haotian in the world of pain and darkness." In the eyes of Haotian Taoism, luck was a gift from Haotian to human beings, while misfortune was a punishment from Haotian. He had been so lucky in his life. However, today in this mountain abandoned by Haotian, he suddenly found himself ruthlessly abandoned by Haotian. No matter how strong his will and Taoist heart was, he could not bear such a huge blow. Prince Longqing slowly stood up. His severely injured and extremely weak body swayed in the wind and snow. He let out a painful howl like a beast before he managed to stand up. He ignored Yi Hongyu beside him and took a step forward. He missed a step and rolled down the snow cliff. With a dull thud, he fell down the snow cliff. His body wrapped in black lay in the snow, motionless. Yi Hongyu walked to the edge of the cliff and silently looked at the snow below. Time passed slowly and the wind and snow between the cliffs became stronger. Prince Longqing, who was about to be buried in the snow, suddenly moved and then stood up with great difficulty. He covered his chest and stepped on the deep snow to walk out of the mountain. Sometimes he fell and got up again. He slowly walked towards the dark lead clouds in the north of the wilderness. He was better off dead than alive. He was like a fool. He did not know his fate. He was like a wounded dog without a home. Because of his violent struggle, the arrow wound on his chest that had been temporarily stopped by the aura of Taoism opened up again. Blood flowed out from between Prince Longqing's fingers and dripped onto the snow, leaving a very long red line on the snow below the cliff. The line of blood did not last long and was quickly covered by the wind and snow. His miserable figure was finally covered by the wind and snow. Yi Hongyu watched his figure disappear in the wind and snow without saying a word. She did not know when he would fall down again and be unable to get up again. He would eventually become an ice corpse in the cold wilderness. She only knew that this guy who was once qualified to threaten her was still alive, but he was already dead. After a long time, she slowly turned around and quietly looked at the verdant valley on the other side of the snow cliff. Without a trace of emotion, she said, "Some people should die," so, her words stopped abruptly. She gazed into the distance and fell into a long silence. The wind and snow gradually brushed against her face and gradually froze her beautiful face. Her expressionless face looked like a beauty carved out of ice jade. Suddenly, she blinked. She blinked and shattered the frost on the ground. The grass that had almost occupied the entire snow cliff rapidly withered with Prince Longqing's destruction. The peach blossom on the firewood was also withering. However, as she blinked, the snow cliff changed again. The grass no longer withered or flourished. The peach blossom no longer withered or bloomed. It just stayed absolutely still at the moment when she blinked, as if time had frozen all life. Not everything was frozen. The wind and snow on the cliff did not freeze, nor did her red dress that danced with the wind. The cold wind swirled the snowflakes around her body and gradually turned into a very clear bundle of snow. It spun around her waist at high speed. The two straps of her fluttering red dress behind her were blown up by the wind and lightly touched the bundle of snow around her waist. It was like the tip of an ink brush dipping into clear water. The bundle of snow around her waist instantly turned bright red. On the two steep cliffs in the depths of the Tianqi Mountains, Yi Su, the wayfarer of the Jishou Abbey, and Tang, the wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine, sat opposite each other in silence across the bottomless valley. Neither the peach blossom beside Prince Longqing nor Ning Ke breaking through the realm by cooking fish changed their expressions until the arrow passed through the entire verdant valley. This arrow is not bad. It is a good arrow. Yi Su looked into the distance and said indifferently, "Only the academy can have such a good arrow." Tang looked at him on the opposite cliff and said in a low voice, "I only know that you have lost." Tang Xiaotang clenched the blood-red giant knife and stood behind her brother. She looked at the opposite side with vigilance and slight excitement. Yi Su stood up slowly. His thin body and simple Taoist bun made him look particularly lonely in the dark grey cliff. Suddenly, he seemed to have sensed something and looked into the distance again. The corners of his mouth lifted slightly, revealing a warm smile. Tang also felt the movement on the snow cliff and his expression changed slightly. Ning Ke slowly lowered his arm, and his hand holding the iron bout trembled slightly. This arrow had consumed too much of his psyche power, especially the damage to his shoulder muscles. However, he could not help but smile happily on his pale face. The dazzling light in his sense of perception was suddenly extinguished. Even if Prince Longqing did not die, he would not be able to break the heavy door of knowing destiny state. If what Mo Shanshan said was true, he might not even be able to enter knowing destiny state in this life. Ning Ke was not surprised that the primordial 13 arrows could exert such a terrible power in the first real battle and could destroy a powerhouse like Prince Long Qing. At that time, he was only in no doubt state in the back of the mountain of the academy, but he was in the see-through state when he shot the arrow today. At that time, second brother's sleeves were torn when he flicked the arrow. Today, Prince Long Qing was at the critical moment of breaking the realm. How could he be stronger than second brother? Mo Shanshan stared at him, her ink-black eyes wide open and filled with confusion. Her thin and red lips were tightly pursed, as if she was filled with endless doubt and shock. Ning Ke rubbed his shoulder and looked at her with a smile. He said, "Are you shocked by my bow and arrow?" Mo Shanshan nodded gently. Ning Ke said proudly, "Isn't it awesome?" Mo Shanshan nodded again. Then she asked seriously, "You have won the bet. Why did you shoot the arrow?" Ning Ke said, "The purpose of fighting is not to win, but to make the enemy fail." Looking at the girl's puzzled expression, he continued, "If you win, but the enemy doesn't, then it is a false victory. If you don't seem to win, but the enemy fails, then it is a real victory." Mo Shanshan's thoughts had been changed by him along the way. She could roughly understand his explanation of fighting, but there were still many things she could not understand, such as why he had to make Prince Long Qing fall into such a terrible failure. "Although you are the wayfarer of the academy and have the support of the Tang Empire, Prince Long Qing is the leader of the young generation favored by the great divine priests of Peach Mountain. He is the son of God of West Hill in the eyes of the believers of Haotian. However, he was destroyed by you in such a way. Have you not considered the irremediable consequences?" Ning Ke said expressionlessly, "If this is a bet, then he should pay the price of his promise after losing. If this is a battle, then I never consider other consequences before confirming the enemy's absolute failure." Mo Shanshan looked at his eyes and shook her head. She said, "This reason is not sufficient. You are a very smart person. You should be very clear that even if he entered the knowing destiny state, he would not dare to kill you. You should be more clear about the consequences if you kill him. But you still chose to shoot the arrow without any hesitation. Why?" Ning Ke was silent for a moment and then said with a smile, "He shouldn't have mentioned Sang Sang at that time." The most terrifying, coldest and most shameless Ning Ke in the world was the Ning Ke who heard others mention Sang Sang. Anyone who tried to use Sang Sang to threaten or control him, he would kill them by any means necessary. Because only in this way could he be sure that this kind of threat would never be established. Only in this way could he ensure that he would not live in anxiety and pain forever. This had become his living habit or his greatest instinct. This instinct started 14 years ago. He experienced the drought and famine in the northern part of the empire, the cannibalism, the old hunter's bathtub in the wild forest of Min Mountain, and killed countless horse gangs in the grassland outside the city of Wei. This was the most untouchable point for Ning Ke and his greatest principle. There would never be any exception, whether it was Prince Long Qing, the Emperor of Tang, or even the headmaster of the academy. In Changhen, Princess Li Yu once thought that she had discovered Sang Sang was Ning Ke's weakness and Ming Men. A few days ago on the snow cliff, Prince Long Qing tried to confirm that Sang Sang was Ning Ke's weakness and Ming Men according to the information from the Divine Hall. However, they were all wrong. Sang Sang was not Ning Ke's Ming Men. Sang Sang was Ning Ke's life. That was why Ning Ke, who was most afraid of death, could sacrifice his own life in order to save his own. Naturally, he did not care about the lives of others. War and peace in the world were nothing compared to him. Therefore, even if his opponent was Prince Long Qing, he would choose to destroy him with one arrow. He would not care about the consequences and would be very happy. After resting on the meadow for a while, Ning Ke recovered some energy. When he was about to put the primordial 13 arrows back into the Polonia box, he suddenly raised his eyebrows and felt a slight pain in his eyes, as if he had been pricked by a needle. He looked up in shock at the snow cliff in the distance again.